Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the knock at the door he dreaded. The morning started the way mornings are supposed to start in Wolfe's Brownstone, quiet enough to hear Fritz's clock tick in the kitchen, and civilized enough to make a man believe the world still had manners. I was at my desk in the office with a cup of coffee that had reached its ideal temperature, hot enough to threaten the tongue but not hot enough to scald it. The crossword in the Gazette was pretending to be hard, and Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids pretending to be God. At 9:37, somebody tried to beat the front door off its hinges. It wasn't the timid ring of a messenger or the double tap of a delivery boy. This was the sound of desperation dressed as determination. I glanced at the clock, sighed, and set down the pencil. "If that's the new piano tuner," I muttered, "he's tuning the wrong instrument." Another knock, louder. Fritz appeared in the dining room doorway, flower on his sleeve, looking like a Swiss saint interrupted mid-miracle. "Archie?" "I've got it, Fritz. You stick to saving breakfast." I crossed the hall and opened the door. Standing on the stoop was a woman who looked as though she'd lost both her way and her confidence somewhere between Park Avenue and here. She was smallish, wrapped in a fur-collared coat that had seen better winters, and her gloved hands trembled around a black handbag that could have doubled as a shield. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, voice tight, brittle as glass in a draught. "That's me. What's left of him before his second cup?" Please, Mr. Wolfe. I need to see him. Right now. It's urgent." Of course it was. The word urgent was designed by fate to ruin Wolfe's mornings. I stepped aside and let her in before she collapsed on the stoop and made me famous for heartless homicide. The smell of cold air and perfume followed her, something faintly floral, probably expensive before being watered down by nerves. She perched on the edge of the red leather chair as if it might reject her. "Name?" I asked, sitting opposite. "Margaret Lang. I work for Mr. Elliot Ransom." That got a small jolt through the caffeine. Ransom's name had been plastered across the literary pages lately. Publisher, millionaire, and professional publicity magnate. If Manhattan had a guild for men who could turn gossip into gold, Ransom would have chaired it. And what sort of emergency brings Mr. Ransom's secretary to our humble lair before the sun's had its coffee? She clutched the bag tighter. "Mr. Ransom's life is in danger." "Of course it is," I said dryly. "If he's publishing another political exposé, half of Washington's probably aiming." Her eyes widened. "You know about the book?" "Lady, in this town I know about everything that comes with a press release." I leaned back. "What kind of danger?" She opened the bag, fished out a folded sheet of cream stationery, and passed it to me with hands that didn't stop shaking. The note was printed in block letters with purple ink, the kind that stains even your conscience. You'll pay for what was printed. No signature, no date, just that single promise. I'd seen friendlier invitations to funerals. "When did he get this?" "Yesterday afternoon. I told him we should call the police." He laughed, said it was some crank from the Senate committee he'd exposed, but last night he didn't come home. I raised an eyebrow. "So he's missing?" "No, he was at his club till midnight, the Knickerbocker. I called, but he hasn't answered his phone since. He never stays silent this long." Her voice cracked on the never. I was already calculating the odds of Wolfe's reaction. Between orchid hours and breakfast, the man considered human contact a misdemeanor. Still, something in the woman's face, a tight desperation trying to remain proper, made it hard to give her the brush off. "Miss Lang, you realize what time it is?" "Yes, but please, he's in danger. I can feel it. And everyone says Mr. Wolfe can perform miracles," I finished. "He can, but only after 11. Right now he's communing with plant life." She blinked. "Plants?" "Orchids, specifically. He talks to them, they don't talk back, and civilization survives another day." I folded the letter and kept my tone easy. "Look, I'll see if I can get an exception, but you might want to pray he's in a charitable mood." I headed for the elevator, pressed the button, and rehearsed my plea. The trick with Wolfe was to make it sound like the interruption was the universe's fault, not mine. The elevator hummed upward like an exhausted preacher. At the top landing, the heavy scent of orchids hit me, sweet, damp, and self-important. I found Wolfe in the middle of his jungle, towering over a table of delicate blooms as if they were jury and judge. He was wearing his mustard-coloured house jacket, which clashed violently with the greenery, but flattered his sense of defiance. I waited till Theodore Horstman, his orchid man, stepped aside before clearing my throat. "We've got a visitor downstairs, boss. Says she's carrying an emergency." "Archie," he said without turning, "you know my sentiments regarding intrusion between 9 and 11. "I do, but this one's trembling hard enough to water your orchids for you." "Pfui, I employ a man for that purpose." "She works for Elliot Ransom." That made him pause, a big man's pause, complete stillness, then a slow turn of the head. "Ransom, the publisher of that scandalous volume about the late Senator Linton." "The same. She brought a letter predicting his funeral in advance. Purple ink, no signature." He stared at me, lips compressed, then snapped the bell cord that hung like a guillotine rope beside his table. "Fritz will prepare coffee for our guest. I will come down in 10 minutes. That was lightning speed by Wolfe standards. I almost applauded. 10 minutes later, when he rolled into the office and filled the doorway with circumference and command, Margaret Lang shot to her feet like a schoolgirl caught whispering. Fritz entered behind him, silent, with a tray holding coffee and cinnamon rolls. "Sit," Wolfe said, gesturing toward the red chair. "Miss Lang, you have already violated my routine. Pray make your violation worth the inconvenience." She tried to speak but stumbled. "Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Ransom, he's—" "Compose yourself. Words, Miss Lang, are the foundation of your profession and mine. Use them." Archie Goodwin, morale officer, leaned forward. "She's rattled, boss. Maybe start with something soft, like what day it is." His eyes flicked to me. "Archie, silence. You are not a metronome." That earned me half a grin from Margaret and half a glare from Wolfe, which I counted as a tie. She managed to tell her story again, slower this time, while Wolfe listened with eyes half closed, the way some men listen to Bach. When she finished, he lifted the purple ink letter delicately, as if it might bruise. "The penmanship is deliberate, masculine force constrained by feminine affectation. Note the rounded ease, and the ink, Violet Waterman. Expensive, uncommon. The paper stock, Harrison & Sons, Madison Avenue. Used almost exclusively by the upper professional class." "So," I said, "our crank has good taste." He ignored me. "The phrasing, however, is inelegant. A threat couched in cliché betrays fear, not confidence. Miss Lang, this note was intended to alarm, not to warn. The author wished to prevent the book's publication through intimidation." She clasped her hands. "Then you think Mr. Ransom is safe?" "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that he has already ignored one warning too many. You will tell him to come here at 3 o'clock this afternoon." She blinked. He doesn't know I came." "Then you will correct that oversight. I will not pursue conjecture without client and retainer. 3 o'clock. "But if he won't—" "Then," Wolfe said, rising slightly in his chair like a mountain preparing to shift, "I shall not lift a finger. Archie will show you out." That was my cue. I stood, trying to soften the eviction. "You heard the man. Between now and 3 he's married to his orchids. Don't take it personal. He treats murder the same way." She looked from him to me, eyes glistening. "All right, I'll try." She hesitated at the door. "You don't think I'm foolish coming here?" "Lady," I said, "foolish is writing letters in purple ink. You're just ahead of the panic." Her lips twitched in something that might have been gratitude. She left, clutching the bag like a lifeline. I closed the door gently, no sense letting desperation echo through good mahogany. When I turned back, Wolfe was regarding me as though I'd let a draft in. "You disapprove?" he asked. "I'd call it curiosity. You don't usually grant audiences without the check first." He sipped the coffee Fritz had poured. "The matter touches on a principle, Archie. The printed word is a form of power. To threaten it is to threaten civilization. I will not have civilization threatened before luncheon." "That's noble. But what if civilization calls before 3? He shut his eyes. "Then civilization will wait. I have orchids to mist." He rose, unfolded, and headed for the elevator. The bell cord gave a faint jingle as he passed, like punctuation on his final sentence. I watched him go and muttered to the air, "One of these days a murderer's going to schedule around your plant life, and then where'll we be?" The air didn't answer. It seldom does. I sat back at the desk, picked up the crossword again, and stared at the clue for four-letter word meaning doom. The answer, naturally, was WOLFE. Outside, the city kept pounding at doors. Inside, we waited for 3 o'clock, and whatever words would come knocking next. At 3 o'clock sharp, the brownstone air had the lazy dignity of a man digesting lunch. Wolfe had finished his lamb with saffron rice precisely 22 minutes earlier, which meant the office was safe territory again. Fritz had cleared the table, the orchids were basking upstairs, and Wolfe was back behind his desk, working at the noble occupation of buttering toast with the focus of a surgeon. When the doorbell rang, he lifted one eyebrow at me. "Archie." "Of course, sir. I'll restrain my instinct to ignore it." Margaret Lang stepped in like a shadow that had learned to tremble. Her fur collar was damp from the drizzle, and her eyes darted toward Wolfe's bulk the way a schoolgirl eyes the principal before confession. Behind her came Elliot Ransom, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than my yearly suits combined. He had the kind of tan you can only buy on yachts, and the sort of smile that's been trained by photographers and enemies. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, offering a smooth baritone and a gloved hand, "I appreciate the courtesy of seeing me on such short notice." Wolfe didn't rise. "I am not courteous, sir. I am punctual. Pray sit." Ransom hesitated, glanced at Margaret as if for permission, then lowered himself into the red chair. He clasped his gloves between nervous fingers. The room caught the faint aroma of printer's ink, probably clinging from his office the way guilt clings to politicians. I shut the door and took my usual seat near the globe. My job was to observe, annotate, and, if necessary, rescue the conversation before Wolfe throttled it with adjectives. Ransom cleared his throat. "You've probably heard of my company, Ransom and Hart Publishing." "I read occasionally," Wolfe said, slicing his toast. "Your imprint decorates many regrettable volumes." The man smiled thinly. "Regrettable or profitable, depending on one's moral appetite. Our latest book, The Linton Legacy, has stirred more than reviews. I believe my life may be in danger." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "I told you he'd listen," she murmured. "I am listening," Wolfe replied, "though I regret it already. Proceed." Ransom drew a breath. "The book is a biography of the late Senator Linton. It exposes certain financial improprieties, none libelous, all documented. Since advance copies went out, I've received letters, phone calls, and yesterday, this." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on Wolfe's blotter. I recognized the purple ink instantly. Our earlier guest's exhibit had found its mate. Wolfe used a pencil to slide the sheet open, his eyes flicking once across the page. Identical stationery, the same vulgar hue. He sniffed, literally. Madison Avenue stock, number 47, manufactured by Whitmore and Company, not inexpensive. Ransom shifted. "You mean you can identify paper brands by smell?" "By texture," Wolfe said. "The olfactory element is a grace note. The writer chose costly materials to disguise common motive. That was Wolfe for you, diagnosing class warfare through stationery." He set the letter aside. "Mr. Ransom, enumerate your potential enemies." The publisher laughed once, brittle. "I'd need stenographers. Let's confine it to the people with resources. The senator's widow, Mrs. Harriet Linton, and his former law partner, Mr. Eldon Keene. Both warned me the book would ruin reputations." "Which it will." Ransom hesitated. "Truth ruins nothing." Wolfe's lids drooped. "Nonsense. Truth has devastated more institutions than plague. Describe the threats." "Letters. Anonymous. One said the country doesn't need muckrakers. Another promised I'd choke on my own ink. Colourful crowd, these patriots. I said, maybe they just resent your proofreading standards." Ransom didn't appreciate the humour. Margaret did faintly. Wolfe scowled at me, the formal notice that levity was temporarily suspended. "Mr. Ransom," he resumed, "how many copies of this biography exist?" 5 advance proofs, 2 carbons of the manuscript, and the printer's plates, all locked at our plant. "Anyone besides you and Miss Lang with access?" "The editor, Peter Halliday." "Describe him." "Brilliant, difficult, the sort who proofreads dinner menus for syntax. but loyal. Loyalty, Wolfe murmured, is an overrated virtue when mixed with ambition. Margaret leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, can't you tell who wrote those letters? The ink, the paper, something? Possibly, Wolfe said, but I do not divine, I deduce. Ink and paper reveal class and opportunity, not identity. This was composed by a woman. Ransom blinked. A woman? Yes. Observe the alignment. Left margin irregular, right untrimmed. The loops of the Y are narrow, indicating a smaller hand. The phrasing, pay for what was printed, contains the moral cadence of feminine indignation. No man writes of printing as punishment. A woman's vendetta, then, channeled through moral outrage. Ransom frowned. That's absurd. Indeed, Wolfe said placidly. Truth often is. Margaret whispered, Mrs. Linton. He cut her off sharply. That's enough. His tone carried authority, but it cracked on the edge. Wolfe noted it. You will not silence her in my office, sir. If Miss Lang contributes clarity, she will speak. That was Wolfe's idea of chivalry, defending the lady by demolishing her employer. I hid a grin. Ransom exhaled. Forgive me. The widow is unstable, but she wouldn't write threats. She has lawyers for that. Lawyers are less anonymous, Wolfe said. Miss Lang, you have handled Mr. Ransom's correspondence. Yes, I open all his mail, but that one, he took it from the messenger himself. He wouldn't even let me see it until last night. Wolfe turned to Ransom. Why? Because I didn't wish to alarm her. Pfui, you wish to control the narrative, the instinct of every publisher. I said, Boss, if you'd let him finish the toast before cross-examination, he might confess to inventing the alphabet too. Wolfe's glare could have wilted orchids, but he indulged me with silence, his most merciful form of affection. Ransom rubbed his temple. Mr. Wolfe, I came for protection, not philosophy. Then you shall have both. Philosophy is cheaper. He set down the knife, folded his hands, and spoke as though dictating scripture. Your predicament is twofold. You face threats from offended parties and from within your own house. Publishing, sir, is an enterprise of egos. Where egos abound, betrayal breeds. You will provide Archie with a list of every employee who has handled the manuscript. He will examine your premises. My fee is $5,000. Retainer 2 in advance. Ransom's mouth twitched. That's rather steep for a conversation. Conversation is gratis. Discernment costs. He hesitated, calculating reputation versus expense. Finally, he nodded. Very well. He reached for his checkbook. Margaret's relief showed like sunlight through storm clouds. She glanced at me. I gave her the faintest wink. She might need someone human after that verbal fencing match. As Ransom scribbled, Wolfe spoke again. Understand this. If you have lied or withheld any relevant fact, my interest will expire instantly, and so will your retainer's usefulness. I am not a solicitor of fragments. Ransom tore the check, his jaw tight. You have my full cooperation. Excellent. Archie, provide a receipt. I pulled a blank form from the drawer, typed briskly while Ransom dictated his address on Madison Avenue. My typewriter clacked a rhythm that matched the drizzle tapping against the window. When I handed over the carbon copy, Wolfe had resumed his toast, unhurried, as though he'd merely paused to discipline the world. Ransom stood. I'll expect your man tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock? Impossible, Wolfe said. Orchids. He blinked. 10 then. 11. The publisher looked bewildered, as most people do when they meet immovable objects in human form. Fine. 11. Margaret rose beside him. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe inclined his head. You may thank me when the threat has been removed. For now, you may thank Mr. Goodwin for his patience. I grinned. That's a rare commodity around here. I sell it by the ounce. Ransom managed a polite smile. Mr. Goodwin, you'll find my staff cooperative. I'll settle for honest, I said. They departed into the damp afternoon, leaving behind the faint scent of typewriter ribbon and tension. I closed the door and turned back. Well, Maestro, you've secured another $5,000 to keep civilization intact. Want me to frame the letter in gratitude? Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. Archie, restrain your mockery. This is not a trifling commission. The written word is power. Mr. Ransom traffics in power without conscience. Such men invite nemesis. Sure, but they pay better than nemesis, he sighed. Your mercantile soul is irredeemable. I prefer reliable, he gestured toward the safe. Place the check inside, then draft a memorandum summarizing Miss Lang's account and the linguistic peculiarities of the note. Right after I phone Lon Cohen at the Gazette, I said. He might have gossip on Ransom's enemies. Wolfe frowned. Discretion, Archie. We do not fan rumours until they yield heat. Okay, I'll keep the fan on low. He ignored that and pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared a moment later, as punctual as repentance. Beer, Wolfe said, 1 bottle chilled. Fritz bowed and vanished. The ritual had begun. Investigation could wait until hops restored Wolfe's equilibrium. I rolled a sheet into the typewriter and started tapping the memo. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him sip his beer, expression settling from irritation to contemplation. Finally, he said, Miss Lang's anxiety was genuine. Mr. Ransom's composure was not. Tomorrow, you will determine which mask conceals danger. Sure, I said. But for the record, if anyone else brings purple ink into this office, I'm charging extra for dry cleaning. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he closed his eyes. Archie, sometimes your levity is intolerable. And sometimes it's indispensable, I said. Precisely. He raised the glass, savouring the foam, and that was the signal the session was adjourned. I finished the memo, filed it in the cabinet, and thought, not for the first time, that Wolfe could make a sermon out of syntax if the pews were upholstered and the collection plate came in advance. Outside, Manhattan kept raining words. Inside, Wolfe had already started to weigh them. If Serenity had a permanent address, it wasn't West 35th Street the next morning. Wolfe's orchids were halfway through their morning sermon upstairs, Fritz was humming in the kitchen, and I was reacquainting myself with caffeine when the phone split the quiet like a tax bill through a honeymoon. Brownstone of Nero Wolfe, I said. Miracles by appointment. Goodwin, Kramer's voice sounded as if it had spent the night gargling ashes. Tell your boss to get that balloon brain ready. We've got a corpse that ties into your publisher pal. That's an optimistic way to start breakfast. Who died? Peter Halliday, editor at Ransom & Hart, strangled beside the presses around 6 this morning. I let out a low whistle. You sure it's not just a critic in disguise? Cut the vaudeville. Ransom claims he was threatened. You boys got that letter, didn't you? Maybe we framed it for the parlour. He snorted. If Wolfe's got something useful, tell him to cough it up. But don't think I'm hiring him. He's just on the periphery. Where he likes to be, fat and aloof. Kramer grunted and hung up before I could wish him a merry indictment. Wolfe was still upstairs, so I scribbled a note. Halliday dead. Kramer antsy. Going to Ransom & Hart before you veto it, and left it on the blotter. Some men leave flowers. I leave warnings. Ransom & Hart occupied the top floors of a 10-story building near Union Square, a neighbourhood that smelled of ink, ambition, and bad coffee. When I stepped off the elevator, the corridor buzzed with typewriters, telephones, and the peculiar hysteria that only comes when art collides with deadlines. A uniformed cop stood outside the glass door marked Editorial Department, chewing a toothpick in suspicion. I flashed my license and charm. The charm worked faster. Inside, the place was a hive. Reporters milled, secretaries whispered, and the liner-type presses downstairs thudded like mechanical heartbeats. Near the corner office, a pale man in shirt-sleeves was arguing with a detective I knew, Pearlie Stebbins, built like a filing cabinet that hated its contents. "Goodwin," he barked when he saw me. "What are you doing here? Kramer didn't summon the sideshow." "Relax, Pearlie. I'm a tourist. You know how I love murder decor." He scowled but waved me through. "Stay out of my photos." The corpse lay beyond the frosted glass partition that read, Peter Halliday, editorial director. He was sprawled on the concrete near a stack of proofs, eyes open, tie twisted like a noose that had taken its job too seriously. His face had that waxy stillness that makes you want to turn down the volume of your own breathing. A length of grey cord hung loose beside him, printer's wire, slick with the last effort of resistance. The scent of ink and machine oil filled the air, sharp enough to cut through the copper tang of death. Pearlie muttered, "Strangled fast. No prints yet. His wallet's here. Watch too. Robbery's out." I crouched, scanning the debris. That's when something caught the light near the wastebasket. A torn scrap of purple ribbon, satin, faintly perfumed. I bent closer, sniffed, and recognized lilac. "Well, well," I said, "a lady's touch in a gentleman's shop." "Keep your nose out of the evidence," Pearlie snapped. "Relax. I'm not stealing it. I'm admiring the colour scheme. Matches a letter we saw yesterday." He grunted. "Yeah, Kramer told me. That fat genius better not claim psychic powers when he hears this." I left the crime scene boys to their flashbulbs and started my rounds. In a place like this, gossip travels faster than ink. First stop was Agnes Dean, copy chief, a brunette with a cigarette in one hand and sarcasm in the other. Her desk looked like a cyclone had been cross-referencing manuscripts. "Miss Dean," I said, showing credentials. "Archie Goodwin working with Mr. Ransom. Mind if I borrow 5 minutes and you're in sight?" "Depends," she said. "Are you paying for either?" "Not yet, but I tip in compliments." She exhaled smoke that could have peeled paint. "Poor Peter. He was impossible, but not terminally so. I warned him that book would get someone killed." "Meaning which book?" "The Linton biography. Half the city's calling it a smear, the other half a masterpiece. I just call it late." Her lipstick left a faint smudge on the cigarette tip. Lilac hue, interesting coincidence. "You work late last night?" I asked. "Till 11, proofing chapter 14, the part about the slush fund." "Why?" "Routine curiosity. Notice anyone hanging around after you left?" "Just Gordon Vale, the publicist, and Lou Rousseau, our night printer. Gordon said he had to finish a press release. Lou's allergic to schedules." "Mind telling me what kind of perfume you wear?" She arched a brow. "Why, detective, planning to take dictation from my pulse." "Strictly olfactory research," she grinned. "It's called Spring Whisper, lilac base, but half the women in New York wear it." "Sure, but not all of them strangle editors. Thanks for the chat." "Any time, Goodwin. Just bring coffee instead of questions next time." Next stop, Lou Rousseau, the printer. Downstairs, the presses thundered, iron beasts sweating ink. Rousseau was a small man with nicotine fingers and the guilty air of someone who's been born apologizing. "Lou," I called over the din. "I'm Archie Goodwin, private license. You the night printer?" He nodded nervously. Yeah, I found him, Mr. Halliday. I came in at 6 and..." He swallowed. "He was already..." "I get it. Anybody else around?" "Not that I saw, but the lights upstairs were on around 2 when I went out for coffee. Thought maybe Mr. Vale was working late again." "You and Halliday get along?" "Sure. He was tough but fair. Never yelled about typos unless they were his." His eyes darted toward the stairwell. "You think it's about that Linton book?" "I think you should stick to printing it and let the detectives argue over punctuation." He managed a shaky grin. "They always do." Back upstairs, I found Gordon Vale, the publicist, in his office dictating to a stenographer with the solemnity of a bishop hearing confession. Slick hair, slicker suit, and a tie that screamed Broadway matinee villain. He dismissed the stenographer with a wave and gave me a smile polished enough to reflect light. "Ah, Wolfe's man. I was expecting you." "That's flattering. You expecting the police too?" "They've already inspected me, thank you. I'm still unstrangled." "Give them time. You were here late last night?" "Indeed. Drafting our official statement about the book's release. Mr. Ransom wanted copies by morning." "And Halliday?" "He was proofing final galleys. Said he'd stay till dawn if necessary." Vale's eyes glinted. "He was obsessive, but not suicidal." "You two friendly?" "I admire competence, not neurosis." "Where were you between 2 and 6? "At home, asleep. My housekeeper can confirm. But you already know I'm innocent, don't you? I can tell by that skeptical eyebrow." "It's a gift," I said, one I unwrap carefully. He laughed softly. "For what it's worth, Halliday made enemies faster than deadlines. Maybe look among the women. He had a talent for editing hearts as well as manuscripts. That was a red herring gift wrapped in gossip, and he knew it." "Thanks, Vale. If murder's an art, this joint's the gallery," he smirked. "And who's the critic?" "Me. I don't clap till the killer takes a bow." By the time I left, noon had crawled up behind the rain clouds. I stopped at a corner stand for a hot dog and reflection, 2 things that go well with mustard. The case already had all the right ingredients: jealousy, ambition, and purple ink. The only thing missing was sense. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, hands folded on his middle shelf of humanity, eyes half closed. The letter I'd left him lay open beside a fresh beer. "You've seen the corpse?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah. Halliday checked out courtesy of a printer's wire. The only thing in his favour is he died clean, no typos." "Phooey. Spare me gallows wit. What of the letter's twin?" "Confirmed. Found a scrap of purple ribbon near the body, smelled like lilac perfume. The office is crawling with women who could have worn it, including a copy chief with sharper edges than the linotype." "Her name?" "Agnes Dean. Smart, sarcastic and fragrant." Wolfe opened one eye. "Scent is a treacherous clue, Archie. It drifts and deceives." "Tell that to Halliday. Something drifted his way and left fingerprints of lilac." He sighed. "Kramer will attribute the death to passion. He always does when intellect would suffice." "You're predicting déjà vu before the autopsy?" "Experience, not prophecy. Compile your notes, then dine. We shall await Kramer's inevitable intrusion." "Meaning you'll wait seated and I'll open the door?" "Precisely." I took that as permission to sit and type. The keys clacked out my report while Wolfe's silence filled the room like incense. Every case started this way, me sweating the legwork, him marinating in deduction. When Fritz appeared in the doorway at 1 o'clock sharp with a tray, veal paprika, crusty rolls, and Wolfe's afternoon beer, it felt like a curtain lowering on Act 1. "Lunch," Fritz announced. Wolfe inhaled deeply. "Ah, civilization endures." I pulled the last sheet from the typewriter, set it on his desk, and said, "Enjoy your veal. If murder's an art, I've just toured the exhibition." He didn't open his eyes. "Then, Archie, let us hope the critic does not become the next exhibit." That was his version of affection. I grinned, poured myself coffee instead of beer, and figured the afternoon would bring either Kramer or another body with better prose. At 7:46 that evening, Fritz's veal paprika perfume was still loitering in the air, and I was considering whether to risk a second helping when the front bell began its war cry. It wasn't a polite ding-dong. It was the kind of push that makes a man picture fingerprints on brass. I knew that kind of ring. It carried the rhythm of cigar smoke and homicide. I opened the door to find Inspector Kramer standing there like a man who'd wrestled the day and lost on points. His overcoat was rain-spattered, his tie half-defeated, and the cigar between his teeth looked chewed enough to qualify as evidence. "Evening, Goodwin," he grunted. "Tell your boss I'm not here." "That's convenient. He's upstairs. I can tell him you're not here while you're here." Kramer scowled. "Cut the stand-up. I'm coming in." He brushed past me, trailing tobacco and frustration. I trailed him into the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk, large enough to make the oak look fragile. He was polishing his beer glass with the reverence of a monk tending relics. Wolfe's eyes flicked up. "Inspector Kramer, this is an unheralded visitation." "Yeah," Kramer muttered, collapsing into the red chair. "So's typhoid." I took my post by the globe. Kramer lit the fresh half of his cigar and exhaled enough smoke to start weather patterns. "The Gazette's having a picnic," he said. "Front page, publisher's murder baffles police." He tossed a folded newspaper onto Wolfe's blotter. "They're making it sound like we can't find our own shoes." Wolfe didn't touch the paper. "A slander, certainly, though not without precedent." Kramer's jaw twitched. "You think you're funny." "I seldom think of myself at all, Inspector. It's distracting." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep the grin from escaping. Kramer dug into his pocket and slapped down a glossy photograph. "That's Halliday, your publisher's editor, found this morning next to his printing press. See what's beside his right hand?" Wolfe leaned forward slightly, movement enough to qualify as curiosity. "A bottle of violet ink." "Purple," Kramer corrected. "Same colour as that cranknote Ransom got. The lab's working on it, but so far it's just ink. You know how much that helps." Wolfe reached for his glass. "The hue is not coincidence." Kramer puffed. "You got a hunch? Spill it." "I never spill, Inspector. I expound." "Then expound." Wolfe regarded him like a teacher deciding whether to indulge an impatient pupil. "This bottle, was it uncapped?" "Yeah." "Was there ink on the victim's fingers?" "Some." "Then he handled it before or during the struggle, possibly used it as weapon or signal." Kramer snorted. "Signal? We're not in a spy novel." "No," Wolfe said mildly. "Only the city that produces them." Kramer rubbed his face. "Look, Wolfe, the commissioner's breathing down my neck. I've got reporters calling it a political hit, and the DA calling it incompetence. If you know something, for once in your life, share it without the Latin. Wolfe set down his glass. Inspector, my engagement here is private. Mr. Ransom has retained me to ensure his own safety, not to spare the police department embarrassment. Yeah? Well, embarrassment's contagious. If he's your client, that makes you part of the mess. That, Wolfe said, depends on your capacity for contagion. I intervened before smoke turned into steam. Take it easy, gentlemen. We already lost one man to strangulation today. The office can't handle another. Kramer growled, but it came out tired. He slumped deeper into the chair. I'm not here to fight, Wolfe. I just want to know if this ties to that letter. If it does, Ransom's next. That, Wolfe murmured, is self-evident. So you do think they're connected? I think nothing until compelled by evidence, but the coincidence of pigment suggests a linkage, if only by symbolism. Purple, Inspector, denotes royalty, vanity, pride. Perhaps our killer has aesthetic pretensions. Or maybe the store was out of black. Phooey. Kramer's lips twitched despite himself. You and your phuies. An expressive syllable, Wolfe said. It saves me entire speeches. He gestured lazily toward me. Archie, provide the inspector with your observations from the scene. I summarized. The wire used for strangulation, the perfume-scented ribbon, Agnes Dean's lilac habit, Vale's polished smugness, Rousseau's nerves. Kramer listened, puffing in rhythm, every so often jotting a note in a battered pad. When I finished, he grunted. So, 3 people with motive, 2 with opportunity, and 1 dead guy with lousy luck. Great. Encouraging, Wolfe said dryly. A manageable ratio. Kramer fixed me with a look. You found that ribbon. You still got it? Nope. Turned it over to Pearlie Stebbins. I handle paper, not souvenirs. Good. For once you followed procedure. I tipped him a salute, trying to stay pure for the archives. He ignored me and faced Wolfe. You gonna help or keep pontificating? Inspector, Wolfe said, I am always willing to assist justice, provided justice stays off my carpet uninvited. That's supposed to mean something? Yes. It means I shall consider your problem only so far as it intersects my clients. You will keep your men from pestering Mr. Ransom's staff without my consent. In return, I shall inform you of any conclusion that touches criminal culpability. Kramer eyed him warily. You're making this sound like a treaty. Mutual non-aggression, Wolfe said. Surely you approve of diplomacy. Kramer chewed his cigar until it surrendered. All right. You want to play freelance prophet, fine. But if I catch your Goodwin tampering with evidence, I'll haul him in, friendship or no. Wolfe's tone chilled a degree. Archie acts under my direction. You may question my reasoning, Inspector, but not his integrity. That was Wolfe's equivalent of standing between me and a bullet. I gave him a small nod of thanks he pretended not to see. Kramer exhaled a cloud. Okay. We'll share crumbs. For now. He tapped the photograph. You keep that copy. Maybe your orchids will whisper secrets. He rose, coat creaking. And for God's sake, don't tell the Gazette I was here. The last thing I need is headlines about consulting you. I never advertise my consultations, Wolfe said. My reputation is punishment enough. Kramer grunted something halfway to a laugh. Yeah, tell that to your beer budget. He turned toward the door, then stopped. You really think this is about vanity? Pride, you said? Wolfe nodded once. Vanity and words, Inspector. Someone believes ink confers absolution or revenge. Terrific, Kramer muttered. Murder by dictionary. He left, shutting the door with the weary finality of a man closing a case that refused to close. The silence that followed had a weight of its own. Wolfe lifted the photograph, studied it again, and let it fall back onto the blotter. You know, I said, for a guy who hates visitors, you're sure popular with homicide. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the bell cord and tugged. A moment later, Fritz appeared, ghost quiet, carrying a tray with another bottle of beer resting like treasure on a napkin. Another? Fritz asked. Yes, Wolfe said. The inspector's departure has left an unpleasant residue. Fritz inclined his head, vanished. I leaned back. So what's our next move? Wait for another corpse to edit itself? Patience, Archie. Murder is a process, not an event. That's poetic. Maybe you should go into publishing. Spare me. I prefer literature that doesn't bleed. He sipped his beer. However, tomorrow you will revisit Ransom and Hart. Observe without interference. The killer's next act will not be improvisation. Meaning? Meaning that whoever wrote that letter now writes epitaphs. Find out who supplies the ink. I jotted that in my notebook. And if Kramer's boys spot me? Smile, Wolfe said. You have charming teeth. Use them. That's your idea of protective advice? It has sufficed thus far. He closed his eyes, signalling adjournment. I looked at the photo one more time. The dead man's hand near that toppled ink bottle, the smear of purple staining concrete like the ghost of a signature. Wolfe's voice drifted across the room, soft but sure. Archie, humanity has always killed for love, money, or vanity. In publishing, vanity wins by a landslide. Nice moral, I said. Maybe we'll print it after the next murder. He didn't reply. The elevator hummed upstairs as he prepared for orchid hours, leaving me alone with the photograph, the smell of beer, and the thought that reputation might be deadlier than strangling wire. I slipped the picture into the file marked ransom case, killed the office light, and said to the dark, if Kramer's bargain was peace, he just bought himself a war. Halliday's apartment was the kind of place that gave bachelorhood a good name, clean, quiet, and smug about both. At 9:52 a.m., I was standing in his doorway with a police seal half peeled back and a conscience half intact. The janitor, a grey-haired philosopher with keys for morals, had let me in after I flashed my license and my most innocent smile. The room smelled faintly of pipe smoke and printer's ink, the way a newsroom might smell if it ever took a bath. Books lined the walls in tight, alphabetized rows, all hardbacks, none dog-eared. On the desk, a Remington typewriter sat like an obedient watchdog beside a half-finished letter. Neat to the edge of obsession, except for one thing. The wastebasket overflowed with shredded paper curls, as if he'd been editing his own nerves. I took a slow walk around. The furniture was bachelor functional, brown leather chair, single reading lamp, liquor cabinet stocked with 2 bottles, rye and regret. A framed photograph on the mantel showed Halliday shaking hands with Elliot Ransom, both of them smiling like men who'd just signed a pact with the devil and got change back. Wolfe had sent me with instructions tight enough to strangle. Observe, Archie, record, and do not acquire. I will not abet theft from the dead. Naturally, that meant if anything interesting turned up, I'd make a photostat. The moral loophole was large enough for both of us. I started with the desk drawers. The top one yielded envelopes, stationery, and a ruler polished from nervous use. The next held correspondence, letters from authors, all complaining that editors didn't understand genius. I sympathized. Wolfe had the same complaint about mankind. The third drawer stuck. I gave it a nudge with the finesse of a man pretending not to force it, and it slid open with a sigh. Inside, under a stack of royalty statements, lay a slim black ledger, the kind that makes accountants honest or murderers rich. I flipped it open. Entries neat, ink steady, no extravagance. Each line bore initials and amounts. AD, $150. GV, $200. Routine, until the 5th page where my pulse decided to take an interest. ML, $1,000. ML could stand for Man Lost, which fit Halliday's condition, or Margaret Lang, which fit my curiosity. $1,000 wasn't pocket change, not for a secretary. I was reaching for the portable photostat in my case when Fate, wearing size 12 shoes, kicked in the door. "Hold it right there, Goodwin." Pearly Stebbins filled the doorway like a bulldog filling a doghouse, broad, rumpled, and built for collisions. His coat looked slept in by a committee, and his face was the usual mix of suspicion and caffeine. "Morning, Pearly," I said. "You could have knocked. The door's sensitive." "I got a warrant," he said, waving a paper like a flag of war. "For Halliday's records, personal and professional. You got a warrant for being here?" "Just charm and authorization from the client's conscience." He stepped in, heavy-footed. "Yeah, well, my conscience is signed by the district attorney. What are you snooping for, Goodwin? Souvenirs?" "Souvenirs? No. Clues, maybe. The kind you'd overlook while polishing that badge." His eyes narrowed. "Watch the lip." "Always do. It's my best feature." He moved past me to the desk, eyes scanning like radar. You touch anything? Only the air, he grunted. You always were slippery. Wolfe send you? I smiled. I go where civilization trembles. Civilization's about to tremble its way down to headquarters if you're obstructing an officer. I gestured toward the ledger on the blotter. Relax, Pearlie. There's your prize. He eyed it suspiciously. What's that? Looks like a ledger. You can tell by the way a ledger sits. He snatched it up. Don't get smart. Can't help it. Occupational hazard. He thumbed through the pages, whistled low. Huh. Lotter initials. Recognize any? I'd be breaching etiquette if I helped the police do their job. Yeah? You breach etiquette every time you breathe. True, but people keep inviting me back. He shot me a glare sharp enough to open envelopes. We'll see if Kramer appreciates your humor. This ledger goes with me. Of course. It'll be safe there. Maybe even read someday. He scribbled a line in his notebook. You find anything else? Only a lack of fingerprints on the truth. He ignored that, still flipping through the ledger. What's ML mean to you? I spread my hands. Could be motherlode. Halliday might have been a miner in his spare time. Pearlie wasn't buying. You'll keep your wisecracks till Kramer's done. You tell Wolfe to quit freelancing around official investigations, or I'll personally... Arrest him? You'd have to widen the cell door. Funny. Thanks. He scowled deeper, which for Pearlie meant affection. You leaving, or am I tossing you? I'm leaving, but you might want to check the wastebasket before declaring victory. Halliday edited something more than manuscripts last night. He eyed the basket. What's that supposed to mean? If I explained, you'd take credit. Better let Kramer find out on his own. Pearlie's grunt followed me to the hallway like an affectionate curse. Back at the brownstone by 12:38, I found Wolfe in the office, seated like a mountain range behind the desk, knife in hand slicing Stilton as though it had insulted him. Fritz's lunchtime ritual was in full bloom, napkin folded like origami, beer poured into its sacred chilled glass. Ah, Archie. He didn't look up. Did you unearth anything before the constabulary trampled it? Barely. I found Halliday's private ledger. Our friend Stebbins found me. He took it under warrant. Wolfe sighed, as if the entire legal system had been designed to test his patience. Describe it. Black leather, 8 inches long, written in neat ink. Entries with initials and payments. The interesting one read ML $1,000. I'd bet my milk ration it stands for Margaret Lang. His eyes opened. 1,000. Substantial for a secretary. Unless she's getting royalties for typing speed. He frowned. You did not copy it. Couldn't. Pearlie showed up before the photostat could stretch its legs. Confound it. That ledger might have revealed the motive. Relax, the police have it. We can always ask Kramer nicely. Wolfe's lip twitched. Nicely. Yes, I'm sure he would swoon at the courtesy. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the file cabinet. If you want, I can try persuading him over dinner. He likes steak. You can expense it under diplomacy. He grunted. The man is impervious to gastronomy. However, he raised a finger. This payment to Miss Lang cannot be casual. Halliday was discreet but parsimonious. Money for silence, perhaps? That's my guess. Maybe she typed something she shouldn't have, or read something she shouldn't. Indeed, the currency of discretion is dear in publishing. Fritz entered then, soundless as always, carrying a tray. Lunch is served, gentlemen. Good, Wolfe said. Civilization survives another hour. Fritz placed a platter of roast chicken, asparagus, and buttered noodles on the side table, bowed, and retreated. I watched Wolfe reach for his fork with the gravity of a priest performing communion. So what's next? I asked. He chewed, swallowed, and finally answered. You will contact Saul Panzer. He will observe Miss Lang, her comings, goings, and correspondences, quietly. Saul's quiet enough to eavesdrop on wallpaper. I'll call him. After lunch. Naturally. Lunch first, murder later. While he dissected the chicken, I filled him in on the rest. Halliday's neat life, the missing pieces, and Pearlie's promise to alert Kramer. Wolfe listened without comment, except for an occasional frown when the narrative displeased his sense of logic or flavour. When I finished, he wiped his mouth with the precision of a draftsman. Archie, observe the irony. A man who trafficked in truth sold silence. A woman who valued discretion may now purchase ruin. Words, as ever, are the world's most negotiable currency. Poetic, I said. You sure you're not auditioning for a publishing contract? His eyes slanted toward me. If I were, I'd have you proofread it and charge you double. I grinned. Then I'll stick to typing murder notes. He ignored me, pulling a notepad closer. You will draft a summary for our files. Halliday's ledger, Stebbins's seizure, and the inference of hush money. Use the phrasing pecuniary reticence. It amuses me. Sure, nothing I like better than sounding bilingual in Greek. At 1 o'clock precisely, Fritz returned with coffee for both of us. Wolfe accepted his cup, inhaled, and said, Tell Saul I require a preliminary report by tomorrow noon. If Miss Lang has deceived us, I will sever the engagement with Mr. Ransom instantly. You threaten to quit every case we get, I said. One of these days the threat'll lose its sparkle. That will be your fault, Archie. You polish it with levity. Someone's got to keep the brass shining. He grunted, which in Wolfian translates to affection. I drained my coffee, rose, and said, I'll go find Saul before he falls asleep on a stakeout that hasn't started. Do so. He closed his eyes, already halfway to digestive meditation. And, Archie. Yeah? Exercise caution. The police are feeling proprietary. If they arrest you for trespass, I shall refuse bail until after dinner. That's touching. I'll try to get arrested before 8. His hand twitched toward the bell cord, half warning, half indulgence. I beat the elevator by a grin. As I left the brownstone, Manhattan's noon light hit like a search warrant. Somewhere between the ink stains and the ledger entries, money had changed hands, and maybe lives. Wolfe was right, as usual. In publishing, truth had a price tag. My job was to see who'd paid in advance. If you want to see genius digest guilt and mustard at the same time, drop by the brownstone at 1 o'clock sharp. Wolfe had just finished explaining to me, again, that civilization rested on punctual meals when Fritz brought in the tray, corned beef on dark rye, sauerkraut fit for a treaty signing, and the sacred beer bottle sweating like it knew its part in history. I got coffee, because someone has to stay sober enough to file the paperwork of brilliance. We were halfway through the peace talks between Appetite and Homicide when the front doorbell rang. Fritz froze in mid-retreat. Wolfe sighed, the kind of sigh that could flatten crops. Archie. I heard, sir. Shall I fend it off with sarcasm or civility? Neither. It will be Saul Pantzer. He was right, naturally. Saul doesn't knock so much as suggest his presence through the kind of timing that makes other men superstitious. I opened the door and let him in, a short, quiet man in a grey suit that never creased and a hat that looked older than sin but better kept. If Manhattan had a patron saint of discretion, Saul would have posed for the statue. Hello, Archie, he said mildly. Hello, Mr. Wolfe. Good afternoon, Saul. You've had lunch? Sandwich downtown, he replied. Nothing to rival yours. Few things do, Wolfe said, and gestured him toward the red chair. Report. Saul placed a small envelope on the blotter. You were right to suspect a leak, Mr. Wolfe. I traced the missing carbon of the Linton legacy. That got Wolfe's attention. He set down his fork. Where? It was sold privately 2 nights ago, Saul said. The transaction took place at the Belvedere Hotel, room 418. Buyer signed the register as Mrs. Crane. Cash, $2,000. I whistled. That's a lot of dough for bedtime reading. Saul nodded. The clerk described her as tall, veiled, mid-30s, speaking with a finishing school accent. She carried a leather case, paid in 20s. The seller was Lou Rousseau, your printer. That knocked my eyebrows north. Our nervous little typesetters moonlighting as a smuggler. Apparently. He told the clerk it was just some papers, checked out within 10 minutes. Wolfe's fingers formed a steeple under his chin. Phooey! Theft by transfer. Rousseau must have removed the carbon after hours. Maybe, I said, but what about motive? Rousseau's got ink in his veins, not ambition. Ambition wears many disguises, Wolfe murmured. Continue, Saul. The buyer, Mrs. Crane, was followed by the bellboy to a waiting cab. License 6U39. The cab company's log shows a drop at 55th and Lex. She disappeared after that. No forwarding feathers from the Crane. I poured myself more coffee. So someone shelled out $2,000 for a pirated copy of a manuscript that already caused one corpse. Makes the book business sound like bootlegging with footnotes. Saul gave me a small grin. Bootlegging's safer. Wolfe leaned back. You examined the carbon? Yes. I persuaded Rousseau to show me his remaining duplicates, claimed to be verifying pagination. One sheet was left behind inadvertently. Here. He handed Wolfe a folded page in a protective sleeve. Wolfe unfolded it, careful as a jeweller. I leaned over his shoulder. The type was ordinary enough, but red pencil markings streaked the margins. Additions about the late Senator Linton's confidential funds, and a note implying he'd bribed a foreign diplomat. Ransom never mentioned such revisions, Wolfe said. Who made these interpolations? Not Halliday, Saul said. Different ribbon. Cheaper typewriter. Meaning someone forged extra spice to ruin reputations, I said. Nice racket. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Indeed. Intellectual sabotage, a rarer vice than greed, but deadlier. Ideas, Archie, kill more deftly than bullets. I said, sure, but bullets don't need editing. Fritz chose that moment to re-enter, collecting empty plates with the reverence of an undertaker. He glanced once at the page in Wolfe's hand, but wisely kept his curiosity in the kitchen. When the door closed, Wolfe asked Saul, your opinion of Rousseau's culpability? Minor. He said he was offered $500 to deliver the carbon. He claims he thought it was an early publicity copy. I snorted. That's like saying you thought the dynamite was decorative. Saul continued. He doesn't know who approached him, only that the contact called from a payphone. Female voice. A woman again, Wolfe murmured. Purple ink, lilac perfume, and now the carbon's courier. The feminine motif persists. Maybe we're chasing a sorority, I said. He ignored me. Saul, continue surveillance on Rousseau. If he receives further contact, report at once. I will deduce the rest. Saul nodded. Understood. You want me to tail Miss Lang as well? For the moment, no. Her nervous candour interests me. She may betray knowledge soon enough without provocation. Saul rose. I'll keep my ears open. And for what it's worth, Rousseau's terrified. Whatever he got himself into, he wants out. He will not get out, Wolfe said quietly, until the truth does. Saul tipped his hat and left as softly as he'd come. The room settled into that post-investigation hush Wolfe enjoys the way cats enjoy sunlight. He sat with eyes half closed, digesting facts and corned beef simultaneously. I opened a window to let in a slice of May air and the distant chatter of typewriters from somewhere down the block. Manhattan hums in prose when you know how to listen. So, I said, we've got a dead editor, a nervous printer, a secretary with expensive habits, and a mystery lady buying stolen chapters. What's the connecting sentence? He opened one eye. Money, obviously, but not merely lucre. Reputation converted into currency. The late senator's memory is being auctioned to the highest bidder. Fine, I said. Then we just have to find the auctioneer. Precisely. You will call Mr. Ransom, tell him one of his employees betrayed him, and another will soon confirm it. Won't that make him hysterical? I should hope so. I went to the phone, dialed Ransom's office, and got his secretary's clipped efficiency. Mr. Ransom's at a lunch meeting, she said. Shall I have him call? Do that, I told her. Tell him Nero Wolfe wishes to discuss the vanishing act of his manuscript. He'll skip dessert. When I hung up, Wolfe was scribbling notes on an index card, the big gold pen dwarfed in his hand. His handwriting could have been engraved on monuments. Archie, he said without looking up, enumerate the known facts aloud. I humoured him. 1. Halliday was strangled. 2. The threatening letter's ink matches the bottle near the body. 3. Rousseau sold a carbon copy to Mrs. Crane. 4. Said carbon contains additions never authorized by Ransom. He nodded. And 5. The interpolations imply political scandal of national reach. Therefore, someone wants to control narrative, not destroy it. Meaning? Meaning our murderer may be in the business of truth management, a publicist or publisher, protecting a myth. That narrows it to half of New York, I said. He ignored that too. Fetch the Gazette, the afternoon edition. I crossed to the rack, found it folded on the side table. The headline screamed, Halliday murder linked to missing manuscript. Lon Cohen's byline winked at me from below. Lonshaw moves fast, I said. He's turning this into a serial. Telephone him, Wolfe said. Ask where he acquired that headline. He owes you a favour, I think. I dialed the Gazette office and got Lon inside 2 rings. Archie, you working this circus? Wouldn't miss it. How'd you get that headline? He chuckled. Off the record. A source at the DA's office said the missing manuscript contains fabricated chapters. They're whispering sabotage. That whisper just became a shout. Thanks, Lon. When I relayed the conversation, Wolfe's brows met. Fabricated chapters. Exactly what we possess. Phooey. If the district attorney hears of that page, he will descend like an avenging angel and ruin the investigation. So, what do we do? Nothing. Yet. We wait until Ransom calls back. Then, Archie, you will retrieve from him the names of every person who had access to that carbon. Every person. That'll take hours. I have orchids at 4. You have the afternoon. Civilization requires division of labour. I grinned. And if civilization calls during orchid hours? Then civilization will leave a message. He pushed his chair back and pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared with impeccable timing. Coffee, Wolfe said. Fritz poured, the ritual restoring the universe's balance. Wolfe took a sip and said, Archie, record today's findings in the case file under the heading Intellectual Larceny. Add a subnotation, Ideas are lethal. I wrote it down verbatim. You're getting poetic again. He allowed a faint smile. Poetry, Archie, is merely deduction in rhythm. Maybe so, but in this story, the rhyme scheme's murder. He shut his eyes, signalling the end of audience. I turned off the desk lamp, watching afternoon sunlight stripe across the files like prison bars. Somewhere out there, a woman named Mrs. Crane was sitting on a stolen manuscript worth $2,000 and counting. Wolfe once told me the world runs on appetite, food, money, or pride. That day, it felt like all 3 were on the menu. If you ever need to find the truth in Manhattan, start with the perfume counters. They're the only places where women tell you exactly what they want, and men pretend they can afford it. At 2:40 that afternoon, I was standing in a Fifth Avenue boutique that smelled like money had taken a bath in flowers. The clerk behind the glass display case wore pearls, white gloves, and an expression that could sterilize fingerprints. She'd already decided I wasn't there to buy anything for my wife, mother, or anyone respectable. I'm looking for a scent called Lilas du Soir, I told her. I caught a whiff of it yesterday and haven't been the same since. She tilted her chin a fraction. That is one of our exclusive imports, sir. May I ask the lady's name? I smiled. That's the problem. I don't know it. But I could pick her perfume out of a police lineup. Her mouth twitched, half scandal, half intrigue. A romantic predicament. More occupational than romantic, I said. I'm trying to locate a customer who buys it regularly. Tall brunette, maybe 35, red nails, voice like it's been trained to ask for raises. The clerk hesitated. Normally, Fifth Avenue discretion was tighter than a banker's vault, but curiosity is its own bribe. That would be Miss Agnes Dean. She purchases Lilas du Soir every 3 weeks, precisely 1 bottle. Miss Dean, I repeated as if tasting it. You wouldn't happen to know where Miss Dean perfects her diction between purchases? The clerk frowned. She's in publishing, Ransom & Hart, I believe. She mentioned it while signing a receipt. Ransom & Hart, I said. Well, thank you, ma'am. You've just given romance another chance. Outside, the May air was bright enough to make guilt look seasonal. I lit a cigarette and considered my next move. Following Agnes Dean would require a balance of charm, stealth, and stupidity, the last of which I could always supply. By 3 that afternoon, I'd found her. She came out of Ransom & Hart's building in a storm-grey suit, the kind that looked tailored to hide ambition. Her hat was tipped at a mathematical angle, her lipstick exact, and the faint trail of lilac perfume drifted behind her like a calling card. She turned east, heels sharp on the pavement, and ducked into the Silver Swan Lounge, one of those midtown joints where the light was low, the drinks were high, and the patrons thought scandal was an appetizer. I gave her a generous lead before following. The waiter looked me over when I entered, checked suit, grin in working order, and I nodded toward the bar. Whiskey soda, leave the soda for the next guy. Agnes Dean was at the far end, perched on a stool, cigarette poised like punctuation. Her reflection in the mirror showed she'd already clocked me. I took the stool beside her, and gave her my friendliest grin. "Afternoon, Miss Dean." She turned, eyebrows rising just enough. "Do I know you?" "Not yet, but I've read some of your best rewrites." "Ah," she said, dry as vermouth. "A fan of punctuation?" "I'm a fan of truth, and you seem to edit both." Her smile flickered. "You're Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Ransom mentioned you." "I'm touched. I usually get mentioned in police reports, not cocktail chatter." She sipped her drink. Martini, no olive, all attitude. "So, what does Mr. Wolfe's man want with a humble copy chief?" "Just conversation. You were close to Peter Halliday?" Her nails drummed the glass. "Close enough to correct his spelling, not enough to mourn him in print." "That's refreshing honesty. Most people embroider it first." "Do you always interrogate women between rounds, Mr. Goodwin?" "Only the interesting ones. And you qualify." She gave a small, amused snort. "Then interrogate." "All right, let's start simple. Why were you rewriting chapters of the Linton legacy without Ransom's approval?" She froze for half a beat before recovering with a slow drag of smoke. "You've been talking to the wrong people. I only polished phrasing, clarity, style." "Sure, and editors only delete commas, never reputations." Her gaze sharpened. "You think I forged those new sections?" "I think you know who did." She studied me, eyes cool as glass. "You're fishing, Mr. Goodwin." "Maybe, but you seem like someone who knows where the deep water is." For a second, she considered telling me to go jump in it. Then she sighed, softer than the music from the piano corner. "All right, you want something useful? Try this." 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Harriet Linton paid a private visit to Ransom, the senator's widow. She demanded the book be withdrawn. I raised an eyebrow. "Threatened lawsuit?" "Threatened exposure," Agnes said. "She said if the book saw print, she'd release letters that would destroy Ransom's company." He laughed her out of his office. "And now his editor's dead and his printer's terrified." Coincidence, perhaps, or consequence. She took another sip, eyes steady on mine. "But don't quote me, Mr. Goodwin. I like breathing." I gave her my best harmless smile. "You'll keep right on doing it as long as you stay away from printing presses." That earned me a laugh, a rich, dangerous sound that turned heads from 3 tables down. It was the kind of laugh that should have come with a legal warning. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, finishing her martini, "you're either very clever or very reckless." "I get paid to blur the line." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Then here's one last edit for your notebook. Ransom isn't the villain you think. He's protecting something, or someone." "Mrs. Linton?" Her eyes lingered a moment too long. "Ask yourself who profits if that manuscript vanishes. Words are power, and the powerful don't like sharing." Then she was gone, leaving behind her empty glass, her lilac scent, and the distinct impression that I'd been both charmed and dismissed. Back at the brownstone a little before 4, the air was thick with the smell of orchids and Wolfe's post-orchid temper, meaning any interruption risked disembowelment by vocabulary. I found him at his desk, dictating notes to himself in what sounded like Latin profanity. "Good evening," I said, settling into my chair. "I bring tidings of lilac and lies." He raised a brow. "You located the perfume?" "And the woman who wears it. Agnes Dean, Ransom's copy chief. Smart, beautiful, and allergic to honesty. She admitted she rewrote sections of the Linton legacy, unofficially. But she says the real pressure came from Mrs. Harriet Linton, the senator's widow." That got a reaction. Wolfe straightened slightly, which for him ranked as leaping to his feet. "Mrs. Linton," he repeated. "Explain." "She went to Ransom 2 weeks ago, demanded he kill the book. Threatened exposure if he didn't. Agnes claims she overheard parts of it." Wolfe's fingers tapped the desk blotter. "Exposure of what nature?" "Didn't say, but it rattled Ransom enough to double down on secrecy. Maybe that's why Halliday ended up with a noose for a necktie." "Phooey," Wolfe scowled. "Women and their perfumed crusades. A widow playing censor." "You think she's behind it?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that our quarry is no longer a writer, but a censor. One who believes suppression is salvation." Meaning Mrs. Linton had motive to silence the book, and maybe the people connected to it. "Precisely." He tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared, immaculate as ever. "Dinner, Fritz," Wolfe said. "Promptly." "Yes, sir." When Fritz left, Wolfe turned back to me. "You handled Miss Dean with your usual blend of levity and impropriety?" I was restrained. She's the type who edits men as easily as sentences. I didn't want to end up proofread. He gave a faint harumph, possibly amusement disguised as disgust. "Your resilience to feminine influence remains both a blessing and an irritation." "Thanks, boss. I try to keep you entertained." He closed his eyes. "This revelation of Mrs. Linton alters the landscape. Tomorrow we will invite her here for tea." I whistled. "You planning to charm a senator's widow?" "Charm is unnecessary," Wolfe said. "Facts will suffice, and if she refuses, we shall remind her that murder stains reputation more deeply than publication ever could." I leaned back, folding my hands behind my head. "Well, that should liven up tea hour." He opened his eyes. "Archie, prepare a memorandum for Kramer. Inform him discreetly of Mrs. Linton's involvement, but not her confession source. I prefer he gnash his teeth in private. You know, one day he'll arrest you just for the exercise. That day," Wolfe said, "will be his career's epitaph." Dinner arrived: veal cutlets, asparagus, and enough butter to violate rationing laws. Wolfe raised his glass of beer and I took coffee instead. "To the free press," I said. "To its enemies," he countered. "They are far more instructive," I grinned. "I'm into that. Though if this keeps up, I'll start charging hazard pay for flirting." "You flirt, Archie," he said gravely, "with existence itself." "Sure," I said, "but it flirts back." He waved me off, signalling digestion had begun and conversation had expired. I filed the Dean transcript, turned out the desk lamp, and thought about the widow with power, the copy chief with perfume, and the corpse with nothing left to hide. In publishing, words were weapons, and tonight they were aimed at the truth. If there's one thing you can count on in the brownstone besides Fritz's timing, it's that tragedy never checks Wolfe's schedule. At precisely 4:30, he was knee-deep in his orchids, literally, if you count the mud on his temper, when the phone rang downstairs like it had a grudge. I got it on the third bell. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin holding civilization together. The voice on the other end wasn't civilization, it was panic in a necktie. "Goodwin, this is Lon Cohen, you'd better sit down." "I'm already sitting." "Then brace. Elliot Ransom's dead. Found in his limo outside the Knickerbocker Club 20 minutes ago. Engine running, poison in a silver hip flask. Cops are swarming." I stared at the receiver. "You sure it's poison? Maybe he just drank his own editing." "Lab says cyanide." "Cyanide," I repeated. "That's dramatic, even for publishing." Lon exhaled. "Kramer's on his way to you right now. He says tell Wolfe not to vanish behind his orchids." "Vanishing's not our style, but thanks for the weather report." When I hung up, the silence of West 35th Street felt thick enough to spread on toast. I rode the elevator up to the plant rooms and found Wolfe glowering at a cattleya as though it had contradicted him. "Sir," I said, "you'd better come down. The World just published another obituary." He turned slowly. "Who?" "Elliot Ransom." His hands froze in mid-air, pruning shears glinting. "Pfui." "No pfui about it. Found in his car, poisoned, cyanide cocktail." For a second, even the orchids seemed to wilt. Then Wolfe straightened, eyes cold. "Fritz will bring beer. I will be in the office." By the time he settled behind his desk, I'd drawn the blinds, phoned Saul to stay alert, and poured the beer into its ordained chilled glass. Wolfe took a long swallow, set it down like punctuation, and said quietly, "So the censor has silenced herself. The truth now murders its guardian." "Not quite," I said. "The guardian's dead too." The bell rang, sharp enough to suggest homicide's courier had arrived. I opened the door to Kramer, who came in looking like he'd aged a decade and blamed us for it. His overcoat hung open, rain-flecked. His cigar was lit but unsteady. "All right, Wolfe," he growled. "Tell me you didn't know this was coming." "Good evening, Inspector," Wolfe said. "You look unwell." I looked like a man running out of suspects. 2 deaths in 48 hours and both tied to your client. "Ex-client," Wolfe corrected. "Death cancels retainers." Kramer dropped into the red chair as if gravity had it in for him. He was found in his own car, engine running, driver dismissed for the night. Empty flask on the floor. Doc says poison swallowed fast, probably within minutes of leaving the club. Cyanide? Wolfe asked. Yeah. Then not suicide, Wolfe said. Too crude, too certain. Kramer barked a bitter laugh. You always have to sound like a judge quoting scripture. Maybe he couldn't live with what he'd done. Possible, Wolfe allowed, but improbable. Self-poisoners seldom choose cyanide unless they crave spectacle, and Mr. Ransom valued discretion. Kramer glared. So, what's your angle? Someone slipped him a drink? Perhaps, but where? Flask's the only container. Silver, monogrammed ER cap unscrewed, half full of rye. Lab says traces of perfume. Lilac. That word landed like a hammer. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits, mine widened. Lilac, I repeated, as in Miss Agnes Dean's calling card. Kramer jabbed the air with his cigar. You see the line I'm drawing? Inspector, Wolfe said sharply, do not indulge assumption. Miss Dean's fragrance is evidence of proximity, not guilt. Proximity got 2 people killed, and conjecture may make it 3. I decided to lighten the fuse. Gentlemen, may I remind you the office isn't insured for explosions. Neither looked at me. Kramer leaned forward, voice grinding. Listen, Wolfe, you've been dancing around this case like it's a cotillion. Now one of your rich clients croaks, and I've got headlines calling it the publisher's curse. Help me out, or I'll start subpoenaing your orchids. You'll do no such thing, Wolfe said, low and dangerous. I will not have policemen trampling chlorophyll to compensate for their confusion. Then give me something. I will give you sense, Wolfe said. The poison was administered by subterfuge. The lilac odour links both murders, yet Miss Dean lives. Therefore she is being framed, or used. Kramer blew out smoke like artillery. You've got proof? Not yet. Then spare me the philosophy. I need facts. Then collect them, Wolfe snapped. You have men, laboratories, and the press at your disposal. I have only intellect, and Mr. Goodwin. Thanks for the downgrade, I said. Do I come with benefits? You come with impertinence, Wolfe muttered, but the edge softened. It always did when he was defending me. Kramer ground out his cigar in the ashtray. So, what, you're saying Ransom was killed because of that damn book again? Because of what it contained, Wolfe said. Someone feared exposure so profoundly that words became lethal. Yeah, well, words don't pour cyanide. They command those who do. Kramer snorted. You and your poetry. Reason, Inspector, Wolfe corrected. Not poetry. 2 deaths. Halliday strangled beside his press. Ransom poisoned beside his club. Both surrounded by instruments of their trade, ink and liquor. Both scented with lilac, the mark of interference. That is no coincidence, that is design. Kramer rubbed his temples. All right, genius. Suppose you're right. Who's next on the list? The widow? Wolfe's eyes glinted. If she lives long enough for tea tomorrow, we may ask her ourselves. Kramer looked up sharply. You're meeting Mrs. Linton? Indeed. At 4. You might want to move it up. The way this case is going, she'll be embalmed by lunchtime. Inspector, Wolfe said icily, your gallows humour is execrable. Yeah, well, I'm running out of gallows. The silence stretched. Outside, rain began its tired rhythm against the windows. I reached for the phone and said, Want me to confirm the toxicology report with Long Cohen? Do that, Wolfe said, and instruct him to print nothing about the perfume. Kramer barked, Hey, that's my jurisdiction. It's mine when facts serve truth, not headlines. Kramer glared, then sighed. All right, Wolfe, I'll hold the detail. For now. That was as close to an olive branch as he got. I called Lon, got his grumble of agreement, and hung up. When I turned back, Wolfe was staring at the empty beer glass as though plotting revenge on gravity. 2 deaths in defence of a lie, he said softly. I will not abide it. Kramer blinked. What lie? The one printed on society's finest paper, the illusion that reputation outweighs guilt. Save it for your memoirs, Kramer said, standing. You figure out who spiked that flask, you tell me before the next body drops. He paused at the door, weary now. And Wolfe, thanks for the beer. I needed the calories. Inspector, Wolfe said, almost gently, you needed consolation. Kramer grunted, halfway between thanks and threat, and left. The office felt suddenly too big. I poured myself a ginger ale, watched the bubbles climb, and said, So, boss, we've got poison with perfume, a corpse in a Cadillac, and a widow who plays hardball with threats. You still think it's all about censorship? Not merely, Wolfe murmured. It is about control. To destroy a man's words is to murder his meaning. Whoever wields that lilac scent seeks dominion over memory itself. Nice speech, I said. You should set it to music. He ignored me, as usual, and pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared silently, as though he'd rehearsed the cue. Another beer, Wolfe ordered. And, Fritz, prepare cold chicken and salad. Mr. Goodwin will dine early. Fritz nodded and vanished. I raised an eyebrow. Sending me out again tonight? Indeed. You will visit Miss Dean. Inform her of Mr. Ransom's demise and observe her reaction. If she faints, fetch water. If she lies, fetch the truth. And if she screams, fetch Kramer. That's comforting. He leaned back, heavy lids drooping. Archie, remember this. Murderers, like editors, cannot resist revising their own work. If she knows more, she will amend her story. Got it. I finished the ginger ale and headed for the door. I'll wear my nicest tie. Nothing calms a suspect like good tailoring. He waved a hand. Go. As I stepped into the damp night, sirens moaned somewhere uptown, blending with the rain. Manhattan looked washed but not clean. Behind me, in the warm brownstone, Wolfe sat alone with his orchids and his fury. I knew that tone in his voice. Cold, deliberate, unstoppable. Someone had poisoned a publisher and perfumed the evidence. Wolfe would see them crushed, word by word. And if I had to fetch the next clue from Hell's own printing press, I'd bring a clean copy. If the dead ever wanted peace, they should have picked a cheaper neighborhood. The Linton mansion on East 71st was the kind of place that made silence expensive. The windows were tall enough to host sermons, the curtains heavy enough to muffle regret, and somewhere inside a widow was rehearsing how to look innocent without looking bored. Saul Panther and I were the afternoon's entertainment committee. Wolfe had decided the widow would not come to him. She had money, staff, and social leverage, all things that keep people allergic to brownstones. So he sent me and Saul to collect confession, or at least crumbs of it. A butler answered the door with an expression that suggested we'd interrupted the second coming. He led us through halls that smelled faintly of furniture polish and despair, and into a drawing room where everything had more lace than necessary. Mrs. Harriet Linton stood by the mantel, all in black. She was tall, still beautiful in a way that didn't ask permission, and had the posture of someone used to giving orders to nations or tailors. Her veil was back, showing eyes the colour of cold tea. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Panther," she said. "You may sit. My lawyer advised against this visit, but I dislike being advised." That was fine with me. Advice rarely improves the company. Saul took the quieter chair, and I tried one that didn't squeak. "I'll be brief, Mrs. Linton," I said. "Your name's been circulating around 2 murders and 1 unfinished book. We're hoping you can help us untangle which killed whom." She gave a brittle smile. I expected melodrama from Mr. Wolfe, not from his assistant. "I do my own stunts," I said. "You told Ransom to suppress the Linton legacy." Her head lifted. "No, I told him to correct it. That's rather different, isn't it?" "Depends who's correcting whom." She turned to the fireplace, staring into the unlit grate. "My husband's letters were forged, Mr. Goodwin. I saw the photostats myself. They claimed he accepted bribes from foreign interests. A monstrous lie. I wanted Ransom to investigate before publishing." "Did he agree?" "He promised to review it discreetly," she said, bitterness sharpening the quote marks. "I warned him the forgeries would destroy reputations, not just my husband's." He smiled, poured brandy, and said controversy sells copies. "And you left it at that?" She looked back, eyes gleaming like lacquer. What else was there to do? The law does not protect the dead. I let that hang because grief in high heels tends to need applause. Saul broke the pause gently. "Forgive me, Mrs. Linton. Did you suspect who planted those letters?" "Yes," she said, voice cooling. "Peter Halliday. He handled the proofs. He had access and motive, resentment over being passed for promotion, and an imagination unmoored by ambition." "Then why not expose him?" I asked. "Because proof requires honesty," she said, "and publishing, Mr. Goodwin, has very little of it." That line could have been engraved over Ransom's coffin. I jotted notes in my pad, mostly for show. "Where were you the night Halliday died?" "At a benefit dinner for the Children's Hospital. The Times Society page carries a photograph. You'll find me between 2 women more interested in publicity than charity." Saul nodded. And the night Mr. Ransom died? Her mouth tightened. At home, reading. My maid will confirm. It was a clean alibi, too clean. In houses like this, even the lies get dusted daily. A clock somewhere chimed 4, delicate as gilt. I took in the rest of the room, the silver tea service untouched. The servant stationed near the door, pretending to be invisible, and a vase of lilacs perfuming the air just enough to make my stomach tighten. "You favour lilac, Mrs. Linton?" I asked. She followed my glance, surprised. It was my husband's preference. The scent reminded him of our honeymoon in Geneva. "Charming," I said. "You may not know, but it's also the calling card of whoever poisoned Ransom." The words hit like a dropped goblet. She didn't flinch exactly, but her hands folded together and stayed that way, white-knuckled. "Poisoned?" I hadn't heard. "You have now." Her voice steadied by sheer will. I had nothing to do with Elliot Ransom's death. I despised his cowardice, not his life. "Sure," I said lightly, "and most divorces end with Christmas cards." That earned me a glare sharp enough to shave with. "Mr. Goodwin, you enjoy being insolent?" "I make a living from it. Keeps me in suits." Saul coughed, the universal signal for maybe let the suspect breathe. I leaned back, grinning to soften it. All right, no offence, but somebody fed Ransom a cyanide cocktail in his own car, and it wasn't the chauffeur. She sank into an armchair, veil trembling slightly. "Then whoever forged those letters has silenced the only man who might reveal the truth." "That could include you, ma'am." Her laugh was dry paper. "Do you imagine I mix poisons between charity events?" "I've seen stranger hobbies." "Enough," she said, suddenly rising. "You wanted confession? Here it is. I confronted Ransom about the forgeries. He dismissed me. I threatened to go to the press, that is all. I never saw him again." Saul's voice was soft. "Mrs. Linton, did anyone else handle the proofs besides Halliday?" She hesitated, then frowned. "Yes. Miss Lang, Margaret Lang, Halliday's assistant. She was responsible for the final galley corrections." That made the air tilt. Margaret Lang, the secretary who'd started this merry-go-round. I asked casually, "And where's Miss Lang now?" "I have no idea. She telephoned me after Halliday's death, hysterical, incoherent. I advised her to speak to the police. She never did." The butler cleared his throat softly, announcing tea with the timing of a priest ending confessions. A maid entered, placed the tray, and retreated as if the wallpaper might accuse her. I declined tea, but Mrs. Linton poured herself a cup. The china rattled once before steadying. "You think me a villain, Mr. Goodwin. I assure you the only crime here is ignorance." "Maybe," I said, "but ignorance usually needs an accomplice." She looked up sharply. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone close to that manuscript used your outrage as cover. You gave motive, they supplied method." For the first time, the grief cracked. "If that's true," she whispered, "then my husband's name has killed twice." Saul stood. "We appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Linton." She looked past him to me. "Tell Mr. Wolfe," she said, "that truth deserves guardians, not gossip." "Lady," I said, "with the people we're dealing with, gossip's the only thing that breathes." She managed a faint, tragic smile. "Then perhaps it will keep me alive." We left her there, framed by velvet drapes and moral ambiguity. Outside, the sky had turned the colour of unpolished pewter. Saul hailed a cab, and as we climbed in, he said quietly, "She's scared, Archie." "She's guilty of something," I said. "Question is what? Guilt around here comes in custom sizes." "Think she's telling the truth about Halliday forging the letters?" "Could be. Halliday had ink on his hands and ambition in his pockets. But if Margaret Lang handled the proofs last, she's holding the loaded pen." Saul nodded, pulling his hat low. "Want me to tail her?" "Not yet. Wolfe will want a plan that doesn't trample etiquette." Back at the brownstone by 6:15, the office was glowing amber under the desk lamp. Wolfe sat with beer and gravity. The combination never meant good news. I gave him the short version while Fritz set a tray of sandwiches between us. When I mentioned the forged letters and Mrs. Linton's accusation against Halliday, he grunted. When I added Margaret Lang's name, he opened his eyes fully, which for Wolfe was like a standing ovation. "So," he said, "the circle narrows. From author to editor, publisher to widow, and now to secretary. Each sought to shape the story, none to tell it." She swore Halliday forged the senator's letters. Perhaps, Wolfe mused, but she neglected to explain who provided the originals for imitation. Forgers do not invent content, they distort it. Meaning what? Meaning Archie, someone supplied the facts before they were falsified. Mrs. Linton? Unlikely. Her vanity would never permit tampering with her husband's integrity. No, someone else desired both scandal and silence. I sat, chewing a sandwich that tasted better than the conversation. Her alibi checks. The Times photo shows her at that dinner. Then she is not the hand, Wolfe said, merely the inspiration. The forgeries were bait, not defence. Bait for what? For murder. He reached for another sandwich, which meant revelation was on hold until digestion cooperated. I decided to fill the silence. Her servants looked like they were auditioning for wax museum roles. When the staff's afraid to breathe, you know guilt's in residence. Wolfe almost smiled. An astute observation. Fear, Archie, is the dust that settles after deceit. Then the Linton place needs a cleaning crew. He ignored that, as usual, and began drafting on his note cards. We now possess motive, method, and material. What we lack is the manipulator. Margaret Lang. Possibly. Or someone speaking through her hand. Halliday's ghost? Hardly, but ghosts of ambition persist among the living. He stacked the cards, pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared with the efficiency of prayer. "Dinner at 8, Wolfe said. "Of course, sir." When Fritz withdrew, Wolfe leaned back. "Tomorrow we summon Miss Lang. This masquerade of virtue and forgery must end." I yawned. "You want me to bait the hook?" "Yes. And Archie. Exercise tact." "I always do." He gave me that sidelong look that says I never have and never will. I rose, stretched, and said, "All right, I'll track her down. But if she turns out to have lilac perfume too, I'm switching to a gas mask." "Phooey," he said, reaching for his beer. That closed the chapter. Outside, Manhattan kept humming, indifferent as ever, and inside the brownstone the case had turned from words to lies to ghosts in ink. And somewhere out there a secretary held a pen sharp enough to finish the story. You can measure the tension in Nero Wolfe's office by the coffee temperature. When it's stone cold, we're dealing with murder. That evening the tray sat untouched, and the air could have curdled cream. Fritz had laid out the good service, the one reserved for clients with retainers or consciences, and Wolfe was pretending to read while really cataloguing sins. At 7:30 sharp the first bell rang. I opened the door to Margaret Lang, pale, trim, the kind of secretary who looked more efficient than human. Behind her trailed Agnes Dean, the copy chief, smelling faintly of her usual lilac perfume, and twice as defensive. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Linton arrived, swathed in black and disapproval, with Saul Pantzer shadowing her like a quiet conscience. Kramer brought up the rear, rain-spotted and rumpled, cigar clenched in teeth that had already lost patience. Wolfe didn't rise, he never does, but inclined his head as if presiding over Judgment Day. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Mr. Goodwin will see to your comfort. I shall see to your discomfort." That earned him 3 startled looks and 1 grunt from Kramer. I began my part of the stagecraft. Wrong chairs. I seated Mrs. Linton beside Agnes, who stiffened like a cat near a bathtub, and placed Margaret between Kramer and Saul, the 2 least conversational men in New York. Then I deliberately served the coffee late, which in that room qualified as psychological warfare. Wolfe folded his hands. "We are here," he said, "because truth, like an unedited manuscript, becomes intolerable if left in draft. 2 men are dead. I will not permit a third." Mrs. Linton's veil quivered. "You believe there will be another?" "I believe," Wolfe replied, "that deceit tends to finish what it begins." Kramer rumbled. "Spare us the epigrams, Wolfe. You said you had new evidence." "Indeed." Wolfe's gaze moved to Margaret Lang. "Miss Lang, you worked under Mr. Halliday?" "Yes," she said softly. "I prepared his galley proofs." "And you were the last to handle the manuscript before publication." She hesitated. Yes." "Did you make alterations?" A flush climbed her throat. "Minor ones. Punctuation, phrasing. Forgery is seldom minor." The word hit her like a slap. "I didn't forge anything." "Then you will forgive my curiosity about your payment to Mr. Halliday." Kramer jerked upright. What payment? Wolfe reached for a thin folder on his desk and opened it with priestly ceremony. In the ledger found at Halliday's apartment, thank you, Archie, the entry marked ML $1,000. At the time, we assumed it referred to Margaret Lang. The money changed hands 2 days before Halliday's death. Margaret's lips parted, then closed again. Agnes Dean looked suddenly interested. Mrs. Linton sat motionless. Kramer barked, You holding out on us again, Wolfe? Hardly. I prefer revelation to repetition. He turned back to Margaret. Explain the payment. Her voice broke. It wasn't what you think. I paid him to destroy the notes. What notes? Wolfe asked. My drafts. My additions to the senator's letters. Kramer shot me a glance. I raised an eyebrow that translated to, Here we go. You forged them? He demanded. No, she cried. Not forge, rewritten, edited for clarity. Halliday said the originals were dull, too polite. He wanted controversy, something that would sell. He showed me how to enhance tone, suggest corruption. I didn't realize how far he'd take it until Mrs. Linton came to the office screaming about forgeries. I panicked. I begged him to destroy my drafts before anyone traced them. Wolfe's face was stone-carved by disappointment. So you bribed him? I borrowed against my savings, she whispered. I thought if he burned them, it would end. And did he? She covered her face. He said he did, but when he was killed, I knew. That he hadn't, Wolfe finished. The document survived, and so did your guilt. Tears streaked the powder on her cheeks. Agnes shifted uncomfortably. She's telling the truth, she said. Halliday bragged about having leverage on someone. I assumed it was a woman. Well, I was right. Thank you for your editorial precision, Wolfe murmured. Kramer leaned forward. All right, Lang. Maybe you bribed him, maybe not. But poison in Ransom's flask, that's another story. You got an alibi? She looked helplessly between us. I was home, alone. That's convenient, he muttered. Mrs. Linton spoke then, her tone sharp as glass. Inspector, that girl is guilty of stupidity, not murder. Ransom's death served no purpose for her. On the contrary, Wolfe said, it silenced the only man who might expose her complicity. Margaret gasped. No, I swear. I wanted to confess to Mr. Ransom. I called his office the day he died, but he never returned it. Kramer's jaw worked. You called him that day? Yes, around 6. Kramer looked at me. He died before 7. You got a timestamp on that call? I flipped through my notes. Checked with Ransom's secretary earlier, no record. Could have been intercepted or ignored. Wolfe drummed his fingers once. Miss Lang, whom did you tell about the payment? No one, except... She stopped. Except Miss Dean. I asked her advice. Every head pivoted to Agnes Dean. She met our eyes coolly. She was hysterical. I told her to keep quiet before she lost her job, that's all. Kramer grunted. And you didn't mention it to Ransom? I did not. Wolfe's eyelids drooped. Lying, Miss Dean, is an editor's habit, but it fares poorly in my office. Her chin rose. Prove I'm lying. Very well. Wolfe gestured to Saul, who handed over a small envelope. Mr. Pantzer obtained this from the telephone exchange this afternoon. Mr. Ransom's call records. One outgoing call at 6:10 p.m. to your home number, Miss Dean. Lasted 3 minutes. Agnes's poise cracked like cheap porcelain. He wanted to discuss revisions. Of course, Wolfe said dryly. The revisions of silence. Kramer pounced. What did he say? Nothing important, she snapped. He sounded drunk. I hung up. Wolfe shook his head. An error, Miss Dean. You should have listened. Drunken men tell truths sober ones bury. The room was so still you could have heard a typewriter sigh. Finally, Mrs. Linton spoke, voice trembling. If I understand correctly, the entire book was a fraud. My husband's name ruined by a lie. Not entirely, Wolfe said. The letters existed. They were dull, yes, but genuine. Notes of policy, not payoff. Miss Lang's edits turned prudence into guilt. Halliday saw profit, Ransom saw publicity, and you saw blasphemy. Each acted accordingly. The consequence was murder. Kramer growled. Which one pulled the trigger, Wolfe? No trigger, Inspector. A pen, and later a vial. He thumped the arm of his chair. You mean to say the same person killed both? I mean to say, Wolfe replied, that guilt travels faster than cyanide. Margaret sobbed into a handkerchief. "I didn't kill anyone." Wolfe leaned forward, voice suddenly sharp. "Then stop simpering and tell us who did. You said Halliday promised destruction. He did not keep it. Someone ensured he never would." She lifted her head slowly. "There was someone else, someone who knew about the drafts. He came to the office after hours." "Who?" She hesitated. "Mr. Ransom's attorney, Gilbert Mace." That name landed like a gavel. Even Kramer blinked. Wolfe nodded once. "Excellent. At last, a new chapter." Kramer stood. "We'll check him, but this doesn't clear her." "No," Wolfe agreed, "but it moves her from poison to pity. Miss Lang, your cowardice postponed truth. You let deceit ripen until it poisoned others. Honesty delayed is cowardice disguised." The line hung in the air, final as a verdict. Margaret covered her face again. Agnes muttered something about nerves and reached for the untouched coffee, then grimaced. It had gone cold. I almost applauded. Kramer exhaled smoke. "All right, Wolfe, we'll bring in Mace. But if this whole circus ends with another corpse, it's on you." Wolfe met his stare. "Inspector, if another corpse appears, it will be because you interrupted dinner." That earned a weary snort. "Fine. I'll be back tomorrow." He herded the women out with the efficiency of a fire marshal. Saul followed, silent as always. When the door closed, I let out a whistle. "You sure know how to host a social evening." Wolfe sighed, pressing the bell cord. "Fritz, warm coffee." I leaned against the desk. "So Mace is our man?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps he is the instrument of one who preferred his zeal to her shame." "You mean Mrs. Linton?" "She wished to defend her husband's honour. It would be a poetic irony if she murdered to preserve it." "Poetic maybe," I said, "but not printable." Fritz entered with the tray. Wolfe lifted his refilled cup, inhaled, and closed his eyes. "Archie, we have exposed the forgery. Tomorrow we expose the forger's avenger. And if Kramer beats us to it, then he will have earned his cigar." He took a sip. I grinned. "Mind if I pour one for myself? Watching confessions is thirsty work." "Do so. And, Archie, no gloating in your report." "Who? Me?" He opened one eye. "Always you." That closed the evening. Outside, Manhattan buzzed like a printing press gone mad. But inside the brownstone, Wolfe had done what he does best, turned words into weapons and let truth do the killing. Tomorrow would bring the finale, but for that night the office was quiet, save for the faint clink of porcelain and the satisfied sigh of a man who'd just edited Humanity itself. If you ever want to see a millionaire publisher reduced to a footnote, try opening his safe after the headlines have buried him. I'd spent the morning sweet-talking one security clerk, 2 locksmiths, and an outraged night watchman, and by noon I had the last thing Ransom ever locked away, a steel box that looked innocent enough to have secrets. The thing sat on Wolfe's desk like an accusation. He didn't touch it. He just regarded it as if he could will the bolts open through intellect alone. "Archie," he said, "you have the hands." "I've noticed," I said, working the key the police had helpfully confiscated and then unconfiscated after Kramer finished his tantrum. "For the record, if this thing explodes, tell Fritz to save my shoes." The lock clicked with all the drama of a dying cough. Inside were a few business ledgers, a packet of correspondence, and one unmarked envelope sealed in red wax. I handed it over like it might bite. Wolfe turned it between his fingers. No seal, no signature, the cowardice of anonymity. Maybe it's his grocery list. He tore it open. The paper inside was typed, single-spaced, careful margins, the kind of work that tells you guilt takes time. Wolfe read silently. His expression shifted from interest to contempt. When he finished, he laid it flat and said, "Summon Inspector Kramer." That was easier said than done. Kramer was already on his way, nursing whatever blood pressure develops when Nero Wolfe steals your investigation twice in a week. He arrived 20 minutes later, coat flapping, cigar lit like a distress signal. "All right," he barked. "You said you had something. Make it good." "It is excellent," Wolfe said. "Sit." Kramer dropped into the red chair, smoke wreathing him like a halo fallen on hard times. Wolfe gestured to the letter. This was in Ransom's office safe. "Archie?" I read aloud. "To whom it may concern, should this find daylight, Let it stand as confession. The forged letters were my invention. I, G.V., arranged their inclusion, instructed Halliday to insert them, and promised him advancement when the scandal sold. When he threatened exposure, I acted to preserve my investment. The poison intended for ransom was prepared earlier, its scent disguised. I regret nothing. Truth never sold a book. I laid the page down. Signed, nothing. But the initials G.V. do a lot of heavy lifting. Kramer's brows met. Gordon Vale. The publicist, Wolfe confirmed. A man whose livelihood depends on making fiction believable. Kramer grunted. He's been screaming about deadlines since this started. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips together. He manufactured the forgeries, convinced Halliday to plant them, then silenced Halliday when the blackmail balance shifted. Ransom discovered the deceit, threatened exposure, and was disposed of accordingly, with perfume as misdirection. I whistled softly. Lilac No. 5, Agnes Dean's brand. He swiped it off her desk when he called at the office. Precisely, Wolfe said, a gesture both theatrical and stupid. Kramer rubbed his jaw. You've got proof beyond that letter? The paper itself, Wolfe pointed. Company stationery from Ransom and Hart, typewritten on a machine missing its lowercase r tail, unique to Mr. Vale's office Remington. Saul Panzer verified the defect this morning. Kramer gave a low whistle. You really don't sleep, do you? Not when ignorance is still breathing, Wolfe replied. He turned to me. Archie, the Times. I checked my watch. 1:20. You've got 40 minutes till lunch. Then adequate for denouement, he faced Kramer. You will find Mr. Vale attempting to pack his effects at the publishing house. He will protest, of course, but the ink on that confession is still damp. Cyanide Inspector is rarely carried by accident. Kramer rose, weary admiration softening his scowl. You know, Wolfe, you're still a royal pain, but you get results. Wolfe inclined his head. I endure insults better than inaccuracies. Kramer stubbed out his cigar. We'll pick him up. Try not to solve anything else before dinner. When he was gone, the office seemed to exhale. I gathered the letter and locked it in Wolfe's drawer. That's that, I said. The publicist did it for publicity. Poetic, if you like irony dark. Wolfe reached for his beer glass. There is no irony, Archie. Only inevitability. Sure, I said, and I only work here for the charm. He gave me the side glance reserved for hopeless pupils. You mock because you fear contemplation. Consider, please, a lie printed becomes truth to those who read it. Mr. Vale merely accelerated the process. I said, he also accelerated 2 funerals. Exactly. Fritz appeared in the doorway with timing better than any cue. Lunch is ready, sir. Wolfe nodded. Bring it here. Fritz vanished to fetch trays, cold tongue, salad, and the bread he pretends is diet approved. Wolfe poured another beer while I poured myself a ginger ale. You realize, I said, Vale's confession reads like a press release. Appropriate, Wolfe murmured. His profession required him to package falsehood attractively. I grinned. If he'd lived another week, he'd have blamed the printer. We ate in companionable silence for a while, broken only by the click of cutlery and the hum of the city outside. Then Wolfe said, Archie, call Mr. Cohen. He will wish to know that the Gazette's pursuit of truth was beaten again by reason. Lon Cohen hates it when you make him print your ego in 12-point type. He may reduce the font. I phoned Lon, delivered the news. His reaction was a series of noises I won't repeat in mixed company. When I hung up, Wolfe was already dictating a notecard summary, his ritual after any victory. Archie, he said, you may record. The printed lie kills not by intention but by audience. Got it, I said, typing. You want it in quotes? Of course. The bell rang again. Kramer, back sooner than expected. He came in with rain still clinging to his hat brim and satisfaction tucked behind his scowl. We've got him, he said. Vale was halfway to Penn Station, bag full of money, half-written ticket to Havana, and a bottle of the same lilac stuff in his case. He cracked after 10 minutes. Efficient, Wolfe said. He says Halliday got greedy, tried to squeeze him for more cash, so he strangled him with that printer's ribbon. Claimed the poison job was spur of the moment, but I don't buy it. Nor do I, Wolfe said. He premeditated everything except remorse. Kramer tucked his notebook away. Well, it's clean now. DL call it open and shut. You can go back to your orchids. Gladly. Kramer gave me a look halfway between grin and growl. And Goodwin, next time you dig through a dead man's safe, leave a note. Saves me ulcers. Sure, I said. I'll start carrying stationery. He snorted, adjusted his hat, and left. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled long and slow. Pfui, the stench of moral decay lingers even when the body is removed. Yeah, I said. Publishing. It's murder in hardcover. That almost earned a smile. Archie, your flippancy offends art but pleases me. You may keep it. Gee, thanks. He finished his beer, wiped his mouth and rang for Fritz. Coffee. I leaned back, letting the chair creak. You ever notice, boss, that every killer thinks he's editing reality? Wolfe eyed me. Perhaps, but reality resists revision. Sooner or later, it corrects the proof. Meaning? Meaning Mr. Vale forgot that Deceit, once published, has readers who demand sequels. That was pure Wolfe, cryptic enough to sound profound, accurate enough to sting. Fritz returned with coffee, and the smell filled the room like punctuation on a final page. Wolfe sipped, satisfied. So ends another manuscript, I said. Not quite, Wolfe murmured. There remains your report. I'll make it sparkle. Do not. Accuracy will suffice. He rose, yes, actually rose, to head toward the elevator for his afternoon orchids. And, Archie, he added over his shoulder, ensure the letter is filed securely. Lies, once dead, must stay buried. Yes, sir. He vanished into the elevator. The hum carried up the shaft like a curtain closing. I sat alone, staring at the typewriter ribbon, at the faint smell of lilac still clinging to the confession page. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere uptown. Maybe they were hauling Gordon Vale to the station, maybe just clearing traffic for tomorrow's scandal. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter and began the report. The first line came easy. In publishing, truth sells slow, but murder sells out. I grinned, knowing Wolfe would cut it, but a guy's entitled to a little style before the editor strikes. If you want to know how silence can feel like applause, spend an evening in Nero Wolfe's office after a solved case. The brownstone breathes easier, like it's been holding its cigar smoke since the first body dropped. The lamps throw gold over the walls. Fritz's kitchen sends out the perfume of victory, roast duck, and for once even the phone seems to understand it's earned the night off. Kramer had left an hour earlier with Gordon Vale in tow, the man finally talking faster than his publicity copy. The last we saw of him was through the front window, cuffed, muttering, and headed for the squad car like a press agent late for his own scandal. Wolfe hadn't moved since. He sat in his chair behind the desk, eyes half closed, beer glass within reach, and the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, a Wolfe smile, which to civilians looks a lot like thunder about to forgive lightning. Fritz entered with the duck, carved and arranged the way only a man in Holy Communion with a kitchen knife can manage. Alongside came buttered noodles, asparagus tips, and a Riesling he claimed was too young but which Wolfe called persuasive. Fritz poured the beer, froth perfect to the millimetre. It was 8 o'clock, exactly dinner hour, and the orchids upstairs were on their second bloom of the day. In Wolfe's world, justice and horticulture keep the same schedule. He lifted his glass. Archie, he said, to the conclusion of folly. Which part's the toast, I asked. The conclusion or the folly? Both. They are twins, only the former is legitimate. I clinked my ginger ale glass against his. Here's to legitimacy, then. It's nice when murder gets filed under fiction again. Wolfe sipped, closed his eyes and let out a low hum of satisfaction. Fritz has outdone himself. He may survive another decade in my employ. Don't tell him that, I said. He'll start charging per miracle. Wolfe's eyelids lifted a fraction. Your humour, Archie, would be more tolerable if it weren't habitual. Habits keep a man regular. He ignored that, the way you ignore a fly you've decided not to swat. I have been considering, he said, the strange economy of deceit. Words are sold, truth is bartered, and those who peddle illusion always overprice it. Vale didn't get to cash his last cheque, I said. That's market correction. He frowned, but not unhappily. Inspector Kramer performed with admirable restraint. He neither shouted nor swore. Perhaps triumph dulls his temper. Yeah, I said. He even shook my hand on the way out. Said, and I quote, Goodwin, One of these days I'll learn to like you. That's practically a proposal. Pfui. Wolfe speared a slice of duck. Kramer's affection, were it genuine, would be catastrophic. Our equilibrium depends on his irritation. Sure, keeps the rent paid. We ate in silence for a while, the good kind that fits between men who've done their work and don't need to narrate it. The clock ticked toward 8:30. Outside, a taxi honked twice, impatient with the city's conscience. I leaned back, loosened my tie, and said, "You know, boss, this one had everything. Dead editors, forged letters, perfume, politics, and poison. All we missed was a car chase." "Mercifully," he said, "I detest velocity." "That's mutual. The city should issue you a parking permit for thought." He eyed me over his fork. "Archie, you persist in verbal extravagance, yet I concede your legwork was—" He paused as if the word might choke him. "Serviceable." "Coming from you, that's like winning a medal." "Do not exaggerate. I said serviceable, not exemplary." "Next you'll be saying you can get along without me," he sniffed. "Theoretically. But not practically." He set down his fork. "You are an intolerable gadfly, but indispensable. There, savour it before I retract." I gave him a grin. "That's as close as you'll ever get to saying you like me, and that's all the raise I need." Wolfe groaned, which meant the conversation had touched sentiment and therefore required exorcism. He reached for his beer. "Your impertinence would be unendurable were it not alloyed with competence." "I'll take that too." The clock chimed 9. Fritz returned to clear plates and deliver coffee. The smell filled the room like a punctuation mark on satisfaction. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed again, the colour of the orchids upstairs still faintly reflected in the amber lamplight. I lit a cigarette and cracked the window just enough to let the smoke escape without inviting the city in. "You know," I said, "there's a certain symmetry to this one. The guy who sold lies for a living gets done in by the truth." "Symmetry," Wolfe murmured, "is God's apology for irony." "That's deep. You planning to quote yourself in the next case?" "Undoubtedly not. I dislike self-quotation. It breeds complacency." He gestured toward the note cards on the desk, arranged with the precision of a military parade. Each card was a chapter of crime: Halliday, Ransom, Vale, Dean, Lang, Linton. The parade of vanity, greed, and fear, all alphabetized. I tapped the top one. "You keeping these for posterity?" "For record," he said. "Posterity rarely learns." "True, it can't afford your rates." That got me a look equal parts reproach and amusement. He set down his cup. "Our fee, by the way, will be substantial. Mrs. Linton's gratitude exceeds her discretion, and Mr. Ransom's estate will settle promptly once the vultures finish." "Music to my mortgage," I said. He allowed himself the faintest nod. "You will prepare the invoice tomorrow morning. Itemize appropriately, excluding sarcasm." "I'll try, but sarcasm's my main export." Fritz reappeared with the dessert tray, poached pears and whipped cream. Wolfe took one look and said, "Leave it, Fritz. Mr. Goodwin will see to the residue of civilization." When Fritz had gone, I said, "He means dessert." "I am aware," Wolfe said. "You need not translate my own idiom." We ate in companionable silence again. After a while I said, "Funny thing, everybody in that case thought they could rewrite truth. Halliday rewrote letters, Ransom rewrote ethics, Vale rewrote reality. Only you stuck to the first draft." I had assistance. "Yeah," I said. "I typed it." He gave a low rumble of something suspiciously like laughter. "Archie, your capacity for self-congratulation would power a newspaper press." "Not if you're the editor." He leaned back, satisfied. "The world, Archie, is edited by fools and printed by knaves. I merely correct proofs." "That's catchy. Want me to send it to Lon Cohen as a pull quote?" "Do, and I shall deduct it from your pay." We finished the coffee. Wolfe rang for Fritz again, the small bell cord whispering finality. "Tomorrow," he said, "I shall attend the orchids at length. Murder leaves an odour that must be smothered by civilization." "I'll buy air freshener," I said. "Pfui." Fritz entered, gathered the empty cups, and left as silently as an apostrophe. Wolfe rose, slowly with dignity as though gravity itself were an underling, and crossed to the elevator. He paused halfway in. "Archie." "Yeah?" He hesitated, an event rare enough to file under phenomena. You executed your duties with precision. The result was satisfactory. High praise, I said. You might even inspire me to clean my desk. Do so before I return. I dislike archaeological clutter. The elevator door slid shut, and the hum carried upward like a sigh of relief from the building itself. I stayed there a minute, watching the light fade through the office window, the street lamps outside smearing yellow streaks across the rain-washed pavement. Manhattan was settling into its nightly argument with sleep. I turned to the typewriter and rolled in a fresh sheet. The case notes always came after dinner, Wolfe's version of bedtime stories. I wrote the title on top, The Case of the Purple Ink. Then I started typing. In a town where everyone sells words, it's nice to work for a man who buys only the truth. I paused, reread it, and grinned. Wolfe would hate the sentimentality, but he'd leave it in, secretly pleased and publicly disgusted. The elevator hummed again, distant. Upstairs, the orchids were probably listening to him lecture about moral botany. I stubbed out my cigarette, stacked the note cards, and turned off the desk lamp. The brownstone, that stubborn island of order in a city that ran on chaos, was ready to sleep. I stood in the doorway, the dark hallway stretching ahead, Fritz's faint humming from the kitchen below, and Wolfe's shadow flickering against the orchid's glass above. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, untroubled. I smiled to myself. That's as close as he'll ever get to saying he likes me, I murmured, locking the office door, and that's all the raise I need.